The entertainment networks spanning the Andromeda Milky Way bridge had witnessed many spectacles over the centuries, but none quite captured the collective imagination like stripped survival. The premise was beautifully simple and devastatingly brutal. Take contestants from various civilizations, drop them on a Class 4 hostile planet with absolutely nothing except the biology they were born with, and watch them either thrive or spectacularly fail, while 17 billion viewers placed bets on their survival duration. Most species handled it with varying degrees of competence. The Yalthine could photosynthesize, making them annoyingly difficult to eliminate. The Borvax entered metabolic stasis and could survive for months without food or water, which made for terrible television but excellent endurance records. The Zikari literally ate rocks and seemed to enjoy the experience. The show had been running for 43 seasons, and the producers had refined the art of contestant selection to ensure maximum drama with minimum actual mortality, because dead contestants created paperwork nobody wanted to handle. This season promised something different. Something that had the betting pools across 12 sectors buzzing with anticipation and skepticism in equal measure. The producers had secured a human. Humans were at Tunsisiklan new to galactic society, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 2 decades prior, and mostly being known for 3 things: their alarming tendency to befriend anything that moved, their bizarre insistence on seasoning food, and their unsettling ability to throw objects with terrifying accuracy. They were considered a joke species in survival terms. No protective exoskeleton, no natural weapons, no environmental adaptations worth mentioning, and a body plan so generic it bordered on offensive. The betting odds on the human, lasting more than 48 hours, were sitting at a comfortable 47-1 against. The planet selected for this season was designated PX 7719, though the production crew called it the Disappointment Factory because of what it did to contestants' spirits. Atmosphere breathable but humid enough to make breathing feel like drowning slowly. Water sources everywhere, all delightfully contaminated with parasites that would make internal organs feel like they were hosting a rave. Native fauna that ranged from mildly stabby to aggressively interested in treating contestants as mobile snack bars. No edible plants unless you counted the ones that caused hallucinations, paralysis, or both. It was, by all objective measures, absolutely perfect for ruining someone's week. The rules had been refined over the years into a document that somehow managed to be both comprehensive and completely inadequate for predicting human behavior. After the infamous Krelthon incident in season 37, where a contestant had smuggled in a molecular assembler disguised as a third lung, the producers had gone nuclear on the regulations. Rule 1. No tools. Nothing manufactured, nothing processed, nothing that couldn't be directly traced to organic material found on planet. Rule 2. No biological modifications beyond what the contestant naturally possessed. Rule 3. No signaling for help or outside assistance. Rule 4 through 47 covered various edge cases involving telepathy, quantum entanglement communication, and one very specific clause about not weaponizing intestinal bacteria. The enforcement was handled by sensor networks that could detect manufactured molecular structures down to the atomic level. Contestants were scanned, rescanned, and scanned again before insertion. The producers took cheating personally. 20 contestants hit the ground on day 0, scattered across a 50-kilometer radius. The Yalthian immediately found a sunny spot and began the meditation process. The Borvax dug itself into mud and slowed its heart rate to 3 beats per hour. The Vrintok began constructing a shelter from branches using its 6 arms and superior planning skills. Everyone had a strategy. Everyone had a biological advantage that made survival possible. The human, designated as contestant 17 in the official records, stood in a clearing for approximately 7 minutes, doing absolutely nothing except looking around. The camera drones captured every moment. The commentators, a three-headed Forlaxian named Vex Tormin, whose heads frequently disagreed with each other, immediately began analysis. Subject appears confused, noted the left head. Subject appears to be thinking, countered the middle head. Subject appears to be prey, concluded the right head with disturbing glee. What happened next would be analyzed in xenobiology classes for years. The human began walking in expanding circles, occasionally stopping to touch plants, smell the air, or pick up rocks and examine them with intensity usually reserved for religious experiences. To the untrained eye, it looked like aimless wandering. To the other contestants who had access to shared camera feeds during rest periods, it looked like a creature having a mental breakdown. Day 1 ended with most contestants securing some form of shelter or survival position. The human had created a pile of materials that made no sense, specific rocks arranged by size, dried grass bundled together, curved pieces of bark, and suspiciously straight sticks. The betting pools barely shifted. Clearly, the human was just making itself feel better before the inevitable collapse. Day 2 brought rain, which was excellent for drama and terrible for morale. 3 contestants activated their emergency extraction beacons, deciding that pride was worth less than dry dignity. The Vrintok's shelter held admirably. The Yalthian just stood there being smug and photosynthetic. The Borvax didn't even notice, being essentially a conscious mud puddle at this point. The human spent day 2 doing things that made absolutely no sense to anyone watching. It dug a small pit. It gathered specific types of wood. It created a nest of dried grass inside a carefully constructed arrangement of rocks. It carved a stick against another rock until the end was pointed, which technically wasn't making a tool if you squinted and ignored common sense, which the rules technically allowed because the stick was still fundamentally a stick, just a stick with opinions about geometry now. Is the human building something? The middle head of Vex Tormin asked. Can't be. Building requires tools, the left head replied. Everything requires tools, the right head added. This is just sad preparation for failure. Day 3 started with sunrise, which was PX 7719's way of saying time to make everything humid and miserable again. The human had been awake for an hour already, working with its pile of materials with an intensity that finally attracted serious camera attention. What happened at 7:34 Standard Galactic Time would later be referred to as the incident that broke physics and several gambling cartels. The human took its pointed stick and began rapidly rotating it against a flat piece of wood, using the bundled grass as a base. The friction generated heat. The heat generated smoke. The smoke turned into embers. The embers touched the dried grass. And then, with the casual inevitability of a natural disaster, fire bloomed into existence. Fire, controlled fire, created from nothing but organic materials and stubborn repetitive motion. The broadcast center went silent for approximately 4 seconds, which in television terms might as well have been a geological epoch. Vex Tormin's 3 heads began arguing simultaneously, creating a cacophony of confusion. Somewhere in Sector 7, a betting pool administrator stared at his screen and quietly updated his resume. That's a tool, the left head finally managed. That's not a tool, that's a chemical reaction, the middle head countered. That's terrifying, the right head concluded, and for once no one disagreed. The producers convened an emergency meeting that lasted 17 minutes and involved reading the rulebook 3 times, while the human casually fed its fire and seemed completely unaware that it had just caused a minor existential crisis across multiple star systems. The conclusion was reached with the reluctant inevitability of bureaucrats everywhere. Fire created from scratch, using only materials found on planet, did not technically violate the no tools rule because it wasn't a manufactured object. It was just chemistry having an aggressive moment. The other contestants, watching through their designated viewing periods, had various reactions. The Yolthian stopped meditating for the first time in 30 hours. The Borvax actually accelerated its heart rate to 5 beats per hour, which for its species represented panic. The Vrintok stared at its carefully constructed branch shelter and questioned every life choice that had led to this moment. But the human wasn't done. Oh no. The human was apparently operating on a completely different survival manual that nobody else had read because nobody else needed the damn thing. At 11:22 Standard Galactic Time, the human took one of its curved bark pieces, filled it with contaminated water from a nearby stream, and placed it near the fire. Not in the fire, which would have burned the bark, but near it, suspended on rocks in a position that allowed heat transfer without combustion. The water began to bubble. No, the left head of Vex Tormin whispered. It can't, the middle head added. It is, the right head confirmed, with something approaching respect mixed with horror. The human was boiling water, using fire to kill the parasites and bacteria that had made the planet's water sources death soup for every other contestant. While the Yolthian survived on photosynthesis and morning dew, while the Borvax ignored hydration entirely in its stasis state, while everyone else rationed saliva and hoped for the best, the human had looked at contaminated water and said, "I can fix this," and then actually fixed it. The show's medical consultant, a Threxian named Klep, who had 17 advanced degrees in xenobiology, requested an emergency broadcast slot. Her eye stalks were vibrating with excitement, usually reserved for discovering new particle physics. "Do you understand what we're witnessing?" she asked the hosts, her voice crackling with energy. Every species in this competition evolved on worlds where water was either safe or their biology could handle contamination. Humans evolved on a planet where water sources could kill them, so they learned to make water safe. They didn't adapt to the danger, they adapted the danger to suit them. This is unprecedented problem-solving architecture in biological development. The implications rippled through the scientific community faster than the betting pools could collapse, and the betting pools were collapsing with impressive speed. The human survival odds had shifted from 47-1 against to 3-1 in favor, and traders were screaming into communication devices, trying to understand what had happened to their carefully calculated probabilities. But the human, blissfully unaware of the chaos it was causing across multiple economies, had moved on to its next project. At 16:47 Standard Galactic Time, contestant 17 committed what would later be called the soap incident in official documentation, and the moment we realized we were all idiots in unofficial conversations. The human had collected ash from its fire. It had collected fat from a small creature it had caught using its pointed stick, and some patience. It combined these materials with water in specific proportions, heated the mixture, and created a substance that frothed when mixed with water and removed dirt from skin. Soap. The human had created soap. The broadcast center didn't go silent this time. Instead, it erupted in noise as every staff member tried to simultaneously understand and explain what they were watching. The rulebook was consulted again. Lawyers who specialized in interspecies competition law were contacted at rates that would make pirates blush. 3 separate xenochemistry experts were brought in to confirm that yes, that was saponification, And yes, the human was now cleaner than anyone else on the planet, and no, there was no rule against it, because nobody had ever imagined a species would try to create cleaning products during a survival challenge. While other contestants were conserving energy and accepting that personal hygiene was a luxury incompatible with survival, the human was literally bathing itself with materials it had created from scratch in 3 days. "This changes everything," the left head of Vex Tormin stated. "This changes nothing," the middle head argued. "It's still just one contestant on a hostile planet. This changes how we define survival," the right head concluded, and this time the argument ended there. The human, now clean, hydrated and warm by its fire, began preparing for nightfall with the methodical efficiency of someone who had done this before, which raised questions about human civilization that nobody had thought to ask. It created a shelter using branches and large leaves, positioned to protect from rain and retain heat from the fire. It gathered enough wood to maintain the fire through the night. It even created a raised platform using logs to sleep above the damp ground. By the time the sun set on day 3, the human had essentially established a functional base camp with amenities that some contestants wouldn't achieve in 3 weeks. It sat by its fire, drinking boiled water from its bark container, and seemed to be humming something that the translation software couldn't quite process, but the rhythm suggested was probably vulgar. The other contestants were having various crises. 5 more had activated extraction beacons, citing reasons ranging from inadequate preparation to existential uncertainty about my species' competence. The Yalthian had stopped meditating entirely and was watching the humans feed with an intensity that suggested it was reconsidering fundamental assumptions about survival strategy. The Vrintok had attempted to make fire and failed spectacularly, resulting in minor burns and damaged pride. The show's producers were in emergency sessions with the Galactic Broadcasting Authority's Rules Committee, trying to figure out how to update regulations that had been considered comprehensive for 43 seasons. Early drafts of new rules included phrases like "no creating chemical reactions for comfort purposes," and "no improvised hygiene products," and "no making other contestants feel inadequate through superior adaptation," but every rule somehow made things worse or more confusing. The betting pools had completely inverted. Humans, previously considered the joke species of galactic civilization, were now being analyzed by military strategists who suddenly realized that a species that could create solutions from nothing might be more dangerous than anyone had estimated. Several governments quietly upgraded their assessment of human threat potential. 3 xenoanthropology departments received emergency funding to study human survival methodology. One gambling cartel in Sector 9 had lost so much money that its accountant had simply written the human on the financial loss report, and everyone understood. Klepp, the medical consultant, was already writing her paper titled "Tool Creation as Evolutionary Strategy: Why Humans Scare Me Now." It would win awards. It would also be classified by 2 governments who decided that certain insights about human adaptability were better kept quiet. As day 3 ended, contestant 17 arranged more wood for the fire, checked the shelter's structural integrity, and settled in for the night looking more comfortable than anyone had a right to be in a survival competition. The camera drones captured the human's face in firelight, and the expression was unmistakable: satisfaction. Not relief at survival, but satisfaction at a job done properly. The show would continue for another 24 days. The human would place 3rd overall, losing only to the Borvax, who could survive indefinitely in stasis, and the Yalthian, who needed only sunlight. But the rankings didn't matter. The moment had already happened. The galaxy had watched a human look at a hostile environment and decide that hostile was just a challenge rather than a definition. Next season's rulebook would be 300 pages longer and still somehow miss obvious loopholes because human creativity was apparently infinite and terrifying in equal measure. And somewhere in a small bar on a space station near Earth, a group of humans watched the broadcast and laughed themselves sick, while the rest of the galaxy tried to figure out how a species with no natural advantages had turned no tools allowed into a personal challenge rather than a limitation. One of them raised a glass and offered a toast that would become famous once it was translated properly: to humanity. We don't have claws, but we have spite and pattern recognition, and apparently that's enough. The galaxy had learned something important about humans that day. They weren't strong or fast or particularly well adapted to any specific environment, but they were stubborn enough to look at the rules of survival and say, "That's cute, but I have ideas," and then actually make those ideas work. The producers never invited another human contestant. Some lessons were better learned once, and the paperwork from 3 days had already exceeded their annual budget for legal consultation.